nonprofit organization. Yes, we are recording this. Thank you for our YouTube channel later. But I work for Healthy Golf, which is a nonprofit organization based in New Orleans, but we work Gulf-wide across the Gulf of Mexico region from Florida to Texas. I happen to live in Pensacola and work a lot in the panhandle of Florida and Alabama and on some things Gulf-wide. But we have staff working across the Gulf from Florida to Texas. And we're a mix of attorneys and advocates and scientists as well. And so we're really happy to have all of you with us and joining us for this just really amazing little journey we're going to take offshore into the deep Gulf. So just a couple of things about how we're going to do things tonight. I have my Healthy Gulf colleague Alex is here joining me tonight. Alex is our communications director for Healthy Gulf. She does wonderful work and she's going to help me kind of monitor and facilitate the event, but especially she's going to be on the lookout for your questions. So just to maintain some order, we would ask if you have any questions at any time for Dr. Sutton. He can take those at the end, but you can type those at any time during the presentation into the chat, and then we'll be sure to take those in the end. He's gonna present for around 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap up in just a neat, tidy 1 hour or so. So just getting started, I just a quick little story. I have only been offshore into the deep part of the Gulf of Mexico one time in my life, and is an experience that I will never forget, and anybody who's been out there will never forget because it's incredibly blue color. And actually it's the color you see behind Alex, if you can see Alex, and even Dr. Sutton there as well. It's just the most intense, cobalt blue that I have seen before. And that color has meaning as well. Maybe Dr. Sutton will talk about that a little bit. But it was an incredible experience going so far offshore and experiencing this place that sometimes on the surface doesn't seem to have as much life, but there's a ton of life deep down, especially. And as Dr. Sutton, we were just talking beforehand, a lot of that life is sometimes hidden during the day, but really comes to life at night. And I know we're going to learn a little bit more about that tonight. So let me give Dr. Sutton a full introduction. Dr. Tracey Sutton specializes in the ecology and drivers of deep pelagic ecosystems worldwide. He is a professor at the Guy Harvey Oceanographic Research Center, the Department of Marine and Environmental Sciences at Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Sutton is currently the director and lead investigator of Deep End, which is a 120 plus member research consortium formed in 2015. And prior to that, Dr. Sutton led the Pelagic Nekton Working Group of the Census of Marine Life program. He's also an invited expert panelist on 2 United Nations World Ocean Assessments, a founding member of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, and a society-elected member of the Board of Governors of the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists. He earned a PhD at the University of South Florida and was a postdoctoral scholar at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He has currently funded projects in the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Alaska, the Western South Atlantic, and equatorial Eastern Atlantic. And he hails from the area where I live. I live in Pensacola, and he's from just the next county over in Milton, Florida. And so, Dr. Sutton, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to come in and talk to you guys. All right, so with that, I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, does that look great?
Looks like it's working.
Okay, good. And there we go. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. And my understanding is if you have questions, just type them in there and we'll get to them at the end and kind of chat a bit. All right, so I am going to talk about life in the deep Gulf. So I'm going to use this term pelagic a lot. So a lot of people are familiar with that term, but generally when people think of the word pelagic, they think of things like tunas and billfishes and whatnot. And while there is a lot of life up near the surface of the Gulf of Mexico, that it's actually a very small fraction of the biodiversity of the Gulf. The real story, if you will, for fishes and pelagic shrimps and squids are down. So looking down. So that's what I'm going to do tonight is take you on a journey down deep into the Gulf and then tell you about some things we've learned about the deep Gulf lately. Okay, so this is a map, a surface map of the Gulf from outer space. So everywhere that's red here is shallower than 200 meters. So that's kind of a magic number for us. We consider the deep sea to be deeper than 200 meters, about 660 feet. So the Gulf doesn't look all that deep. However, when you look at it from three dimensions, you start to get an idea about the real habitat and volume of the Gulf. So these are terms that I'm going to refer to. Okay, so these lines are special lines. So the top line is 200 meters depth, and the next lower line is 1,000 meters depth. So what we find is that of the Gulf of Mexico proper, so this is including all the coastal waters, about 90% of the volume of the Gulf is what we call deep pelagic, so deeper than 200 meters depth. So that is the typical environment of the Gulf, not really the shallow water stuff. Okay, so you probably remember the depth of Deepwater Horizon, but I'll go ahead and remind you anyway. So Deepwater Horizon was a drill ship, and it was parked over this Macondo wellhead, and that was where the oil issued forth when the drill ship sank. That was at 1,500 meters deep. So that's about a mile deep. And that oil and this dispersants they squirted on it right there at depth all rose to the surface. So 100% of that oil was in the deep water column. And then a lot of it made this kind of um, layer at about 1,000 meters depth. So these are kind of key depths as we talk about this talk. Okay, so I guess one of the questions you probably have is what's down there. So this is not AI. This is an actual picture that we took of a fresh specimen at sea. This hasn't been touched up or anything. This was a deep sea telescope fish that we catch in the Gulf, and we always have a photographer that we stick up in the bow in a lab van, and he takes pictures of things as we collect them. So this is a fresh fish from the deep Gulf of Mexico. It looks awful lot like a dinosaur. Okay, so the project that I'm going to tell you about, we've been banging away at this for about 16 years. So it started when I got a call from NOAA right after the spill started saying it is our job to assess the natural resource damage from this oil spill, and we don't have any data for what lives down there. So I put a little team together and we went out and we sampled and sampled and then analyzed and analyzed. And then in 2015, we got funded to create this project, Deep End, um, and that was funded by the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. So now we have the beginnings of a time series. So we have these samples we collected in 2010 and 11. Then we started sampling again in 2015. And thanks to funding from the Restore Science program of NOAA, we're still banging away at it today. So we're funded to at least 29. So we have this time series going, which allows us to first fully describe what's down there and then describe how it changes through time. So just you're probably wondering, well, how do we collect anything? We don't go down there ourselves. It's too deep. So we tow this multiple opening closing net system because we not only need to know how deep things live, we need to know at what time of day they live at different depths. So we're going to see that one of the features of the open ocean is that things move up and down a great deal on a daily basis. So that's what we call a vertical migration, and it's actually the largest animal migration on Earth, and it happens every single day out there in the deep blue. So we sampled from the surface to about a mile deep, 1,500 meters, and then we sampled separate nets all the way up, and we had flow meters so we could turn out to say what is the number of animals per volume. So that was our big target. We sampled a station grid in the Northern Gulf about the size of the state of West Virginia. So we sampled from Texas over to the West Florida shelf, and then we do it again, and we do it again, and several times over. We do it night and day to see the differences. So we ended up with this the sample set, which is actually the largest of its kind in oceanographic history. So. On the one hand, we say it sucks that it took an oil spill, but on the other hand, we have this gigantic database that there's not another one like it in the world. So we have about 2,400 trawl samples taken over this period of time, and about a third of them was taken below 1,000 meters, which may or may not mean anything to the audience, but 1,000 meters is where the ocean turns completely black. So we've got these layers. So our top layer, and we're going to look at some of the animals. There's some light, and then there's this twilight zone in the middle where there's a little bit of light. And then below 1,000 meters, it's pitch black. And we just and remember the oil spill is at 1,500 meters depth. So we just didn't have any data, but now we actually have we have more samples in total from this program than in all of oceanographic history combined. So it was a unique opportunity, even though it took a oil spill. Okay, so we also sample the water acoustically this entire depth as well, so you can think of this as a fish finder. So as you in this right-hand panel, this is that up and down motion I was talking about. So during the daytime, where that little thing says noon, the animals are deep. They're at 5 to 750 meters deep. So deep into this twilight zone. But you notice where it says midnight, these things swim up near the surface. So you can see that as that kind of enhanced backscatter, just like you would on a fish finder. So this tells us a lot about the behavior of the open Gulf, plus also where's the action? Where are the animals? So at night they're deep, and during the daytime they're up pretty shallow. So we have a view of the open ocean that it's asleep during daytime when you're out there, and it really comes alive at night. And all you really have to do out there is to park a boat, turn all the lights out, and let your eyes equilibrate, and all of a sudden you'll start to see flashes. You'll start to see life. So the open ocean nighttime is really the right time out there. And in this panel on the left, we're also looking now at how this open ocean fauna, what happens when it comes near the continental shelf and the slope. So turns out a lot happens. Basically, the upshot of this graphic is to just tell you that the Gulf itself is not some layered thing like a stack of pancakes. It's a highly integrated system where the animals move up and down through depth layers at night, and they also move from onshore to offshore. So it's all a really highly connected system. Something that happens in one spot could have a really quite reverberative effect on the whole system. We have a lot of other components for deep end that I don't have a lot of time to talk about. I'll just tell you that we look at the Gulf from outer space. So we have sensing that tells us major eddies and chlorophyll, which is the pelagic plant life of the open ocean. So we want to tie the physics of the Gulf to the life. And we've worked with people at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory at Stennis. We do a lot of genetic work because that's kind of the law these days in biology. So we have a bunch of very sharp, pointy-headed geneticists that are working with us. And then we have an oil contamination expert. So it's one thing to go out and see and sample, but we actually analyze animals looking for contamination. And you may or may not know that you can identify oil from an individual oil spill by its chemical fingerprint. So we know if there's oil in something, we know whether or not it was Deepwater Horizon oil, for example. Okay, now we'll get to the good stuff, the what's down there kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you that all the pictures you're going to see came from a guy sitting up in the bow of a vessel shooting pictures at 2:30 in the morning on a moving vessel. So thank you. His name is Dante Fenolio, and he's Vice President of Conservation at the San Antonio Zoo. Okay, so these are some layers. So I talked about the ocean's not a series of pancakes, which is true. Out there, there's nothing solid. So it's not like a reef or or anything you're used to. It's actually completely disorienting once you get into the mid-water. It's hard to figure out which way's up sometimes. So the main thing that changes in the open ocean with depth is light, and light controls everything. So as you know, plants need light. So in the open ocean, plants can only grow in what we call this epipelagic zone, the surface ocean. So down to about 200 meters, there's only 1% of sunlight left, and that's the bare minimum for plants. So it's a thin skin of the ocean, but it's critical for feeding the ocean. And this is where we see things we're familiar with, like billfish and tuna and mahi-mahi and flying fishes. For my world, things started to get pretty weird. So the layer below that is what we call the twilight zone, and it's where light goes from about 1% to 0% in daytime. So there's not enough light down there for plants to grow, but there's enough light where the animals can tell the difference between night and day. And that's what cues these gigantic migrations. And if you had to pick one fish that's probably the most important fish of the open ocean, it's this one, the lanternfish, because they are basically the anchovies of the deep sea. And if you do something bad in this lifetime, it's your karma to come back as a lanternfish, because everything in the ocean eats lanternfish. And if you're wondering why they're called lanternfish, those actually are headlights. That fish on the left, those are light organs. So this fish literally has headlights, and then they've got lights all along their belly. So almost everything in the twilight zone creates its own living light, bioluminescence. These are my specialty fishes, the dragon fishes. So these are the top predators of the twilight zone. So they are exactly what you see here. They're voracious predators. They often eat prey that are their own size. And they're the ones that really control the abundance of a lot of prey fishes in the deep sea. Now they don't get very big, otherwise no one would ever go in the ocean because they absolutely are super predators. Most people think that shrimp live on the bottom, and there are some shrimp that live on the bottom, but it may surprise you to know that most shrimp on Earth live in the water column in the pelagic ocean and never even see the bottom. So the Gulf of Mexico is full of pelagic shrimps like these. And then squid. So squid love they like dim water. So squid are probably the real super predators of the deep ocean because, as you know, we've seen a live giant squid in the Gulf of Mexico, so we know they're out there. They're hard to study, but they're incredibly important for the deep sea ecosystems. And then this very bottom layer, so I mentioned 1,000 meters before. So once you get below 1,000 meters, it is always completely dark. It is cold. There's high pressure. So it's a place where you think nothing would want to live, but we find that there are a whole host of things where that's the only place they live. And kind of the poster child for these are these angler fishes. So you may be familiar with this. The females have a light organ on the end of a lure. They're basically this gigantic mouth, and they sit there and wiggle that little lure that lights up and try to eat whatever comes to that lure. Okay, so that's kind of the major flavors. So there are different fishes and squids and shrimps we see in each of these layers. So what I want to do now is kind of demonstrate how truly diverse the Gulf of Mexico is on a global basis. So prior to this study, there were about 1,500 species of fishes known for the entire Gulf, deep, coastal, estuarine, the whole thing. So that's about 10 to 14%. If you look at a global basis, there's about 30, well, now there's about 35,000 species of fish. About 10 to 14% are what we call deep sea. So if you extrapolate that to the Gulf, we might have thought, okay, there's a little over 200 species of fishes out there in the open ocean. We've collected 893 so far, and we're still finding new fish species all the time. So that was pretty astounding. Before this study, we had no idea that there were that many. So just to put this number in context, if you asked most ichthyologists what's the largest fish family in the Gulf, they would probably say gobies or blennies because those are the largest fish families in the world ocean. Turns out in the Gulf, it's dragonfishes. Well over 100 species of these mesopelagic predatory fishes are the largest fish family in the Gulf. These lanternfishes I mentioned before, there's more lanternfish than there are groupers and snappers. So we're starting to get the idea that there's a lot more out there than we knew before 2010. So of these nearly 900 species we've identified to date, 186 are new records for the Gulf. So what that means is that right now, 1 out of 9 fish that we know now lives in the Gulf, we've learned in the last 10 years from sampling out there in the deep pelagic zone. About 20 are new species, so that's quite a process to describe new things. And we're making a genetic record, so this genetic barcode of all these deep sea fishes. So right now, the Gulf stands as the best known deep sea system genetically in the world ocean. And then as far as the new records, we found the deeper you go, the more new records, the more new things you find. So it wasn't a huge surprise that we found more new angler fishes than any other group of fishes. So this is kind of a take-home point number one. So we know there's about 1,600 species of fishes, 900 of them live offshore. So that means the majority of fish species in the Gulf use pelagic habitat for all or part of their lives. So it means that in these places, these deep pelagic places we've been studying, there's more fish diversity out there than there is on any reef complex in the Gulf or Caribbean. If you like squid, then lots of new squid. Of the 70 we've gotten, 5 are new species. So these are our experts. I am not the expert on these guys. So Heather Judkins and Mike Vecchione, there are squid mavens. Lots and lots of pelagic shrimps, again, new species. So Heather Bracken Grissom and Tammy Frank are our shrimp experts. Even jellyfish. So we've identified every jelly we've got, and 1 out of 4 is new to the Gulf of Mexico. So it really just goes to show you that in the Gulf, which we thought was pretty well known, we really did not know what was out there in deep water where industry is actively banging away. Okay, so we've collected over 1,400 species of things. What that does, wow, 2917. I was thinking ahead, I guess. What that means is that the Gulf of Mexico is one of the most diverse oceanic ecosystems in the world ocean. So it's a special place. And then we've learned a lot about how things sort themselves out with depth. So, for example, lanternfishes live deep during the day, they swim up at night. And we find that things that live really, really deep, below 1,000 meters, also swim up at night. So, well, who cares? What's the big deal about that? If we go back to that thought about that big plume of oil particles after Deepwater Horizon, what this means is that things were swimming up and down through it on a daily basis because of this big vertical migration. We also know that this vertical connectivity also extends upside down. So there's a lot of surface creatures that routinely go down deep in the Gulf of Mexico to feed. So you can see these are incredible depths of air-breathing mammals. Even whale sharks go deep, deep, deep to hang out and feed. We know white sharks routinely hang out in the mesopelagic zone. Bluefin tuna, their young ones like to live right at that bathypelagic interface at 1,000 meters. So there's a lot going on with this high diversity system that had this big spill event. So how did things fare after Deepwater Horizon? And there's the answer, not well at all. Okay, so this is the big graphic. So this summarizes on the left our sampling right after the oil spill, and then everything you see to the right is the system as it is now, starting at about 2015. Um, the fishes, numbers of fishes have declined about 63%, 62 for shrimps, and 59. So what that means is that in the deep pelagic Gulf right now, there's about a third as much life as there was before and shortly after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So it had a fundamental effect, we think, on the Gulf proper. So here's some examples. So you may have heard of krill before, the food that whales eat. They look like shrimp. They're not quite shrimp. They're different. Their numbers have declined 92% since 2011. And that's a problem because a lot of things out there eat krill as primary prey, including baleen whales, like Rice's whale, all the lanternfish that I told you about before. Krill are foundational taxa. And this is one of those cases. So that graphic I showed you before was a crazy amount of modeling to get all that thing with super complex math and all that. This is one of those cases where the data are so clear you can see it in the raw data. So these are individual catches from these deep water surveys of krill. And what we found is that these high density patches, so all these little red diamonds that you see above that highest dotted red line, those are all large patches of krill where the catch is about twice the average. What we find is not a single case since we started sampling again in 2015 have we detected a single large patch of krill. So as you probably know, most predators can't survive on the average abundance of prey. So when we go out and sample, we get high catches, low catches, we come up with an average. We know that mathematically large predators can't survive on that level. They actually need patches to pay their bills, you know. So the absence of these patches is almost certainly problematic for the system. Our buddies, the lanternfish, they've declined 85%. And lanternfish are the primary prey of oceanic dolphins, young tunas, and deep sea predators. And then squids, they've declined about 60%, or primary prey of all of the deep diving cetaceans like sperm whales and beaked whales. Okay, so we looked real hard to figure out what was going on here. First thing is, was it a gear problem? Because anytime you have a time series, you got to look at your gear. Well, we used the same gear. So that wasn't it. We even modified our gear to see if we could make it fish badly by changing net colors and whatnot. We didn't get this kind of variation at all. So we don't think it was gear. We've looked at every environmental correlate we could find, including food availability. None of that tracks. The deep Gulf hasn't warmed up yet. The temperature's been remarkably stable. So it wasn't a marine heat wave, whatnot. So let's go back to the spill. We're probably familiar with that footprint picture of the spill, but we know that there's a water-soluble component of the spill of oil, especially dispersed oil, that's still toxic. You just can't see it. And this is the map of that invisible toxic oil spill. So now you can see the scope. The real pelagic scope of the spill was basically the entire northeastern half of the Gulf. And it was really, really lucky that the loop current was down during the spill and didn't grab all of that and drag it right through the Florida Keys. That was just a stroke of luck. And then we have been sampling the organisms themselves. And what we found was that the tissue loads really shot up during and after the spill and then went back to a reduced level. But if you looked at the eggs of mesopelagic fishes and shrimps, even 8 years later, we were still finding evidence of this marker. We call it a PAH, this polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. It's kind of our fingerprint for the oil spill. We still found levels that were known to cause sublethal effects 8 years later in the eggs of mesopelagic fishes and shrimps. So these are all kind of clues that yeah, it was probably a spill. And so now the question is, should we care about all this deep pelagic stuff that nobody's really heard of and you can't even see? So the answer would certainly be yes if you like marine mammals. So what we've what we've seen, our colleague Kate Frazier at Scripps has looking at sound in the Gulf because that's a good marker of marine mammal abundance, and she has found strong decreases in the things that eat minktophids, these dolphins, and also the deep diving feeders like sperm whales and beaked whales. In some cases, their numbers are down 82% as well since the oil spill. So they're gone, or they're not, the abundances are low, or they just picked up and left town. Um, okay, if you don't like marine mammals, then there's probably something seriously wrong with you. But if you like fishes instead, again, juvenile bluefin tuna. So bluefin tuna use the Gulf of Mexico as one of two spawning grounds in the North Atlantic. They spawn in the Gulf and they spawn in the Med. So the juveniles spend a lot of their time down deep eating mesopelagic prey. Um, Here's a little fun fact if you like seabirds and you don't like fishes at all. We have a lot of endangered seabirds in the Gulf of Mexico, some of which, like the black-capped storm petrel, is on the red list and eats lanternfish at night. So these are seabirds that feed at night on these deep animals that come up. Seabirds consume a lot of sea life. In fact, all the seabirds combined eat as much biomass as all the world's fisheries combined in a year. Okay, so in the Gulf, we've identified at least 137 species of predators that eat this deep pelagic prey that I'm talking about. Things I haven't mentioned: swordfish, big-eye tuna, all these deep living reef fishes that eat deep pelagics when they intersect. So yeah, it's a highly connected Gulf in that regard. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned is carbon. So, of course, that's a major issue, not just in oceanography, but in the world. So, you may have seen in Nature last week, we have an index of how much sunlight comes into the Earth and how much is re-radiated back out into space. And historically, that number is about 1. So the Earth is balanced. It re-radiates about as much sunlight as it receives. Last year, oh no, 2024, the Earth had absorbed more than it had re-radiated back out in space at its highest level in 2 million years. So clearly, Earth is capturing sunlight. The way that we can sequester carbon, the most efficient way, is in the open ocean. So these animals that I talked about that live deep during the day, they come up at night to feed on plankton. That's carbon. And they take it down to depth during the daytime, and they breathe, they excrete CO2, they poop, they pee, but basically it's an active pump that takes carbon out of the surface ocean and takes it and locks it into the deep cold ocean. Without this service of daily vertical migration by these animals that I'm talking about, eating plankton and taking it back to death, we believe carbon dioxide would be double its current value in the atmosphere. So this has been valued in the hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars. So that's the ecosystem service all of these crazy deep pelagic things provide that is typically not valuated when you think about what is an ecosystem worth. Okay, so I'm going to close here by just kind of the upshot of the whole thing, and that is now that we've studied the Gulf, the deep Gulf in detail, We've got a pretty good faunal inventory of what's out there. We know at what depths they live, generally how much. So now we've learned that these things cross boundaries quite a bit. So the deep stuff comes up shallow, the shallow stuff goes down deep, the offshore stuff goes up on the coast. The coastal fishes actually send their young out to sea until they're big enough to swim back home. So what we find is that it's a highly connected system. But when we look at how we manage the Gulf of Mexico and just about any large marine ecosystem, those two are generally quite disconnected. So the idea is that we do need to connect the dots of what's happening out in this large, deep arena that we really don't pay much attention to, and all these other facets of the ecosystem. So with that, I am going to finish. And if you would like to visit us, this is our website, deepinconsortium.org. We have all of our papers online and gallery of pictures. If you want to see that, you can see where we are. We're about to go out to sea again in about 3 weeks out of Gulfport, bounce around in the Gulf some more. So yeah, please do check that out, and then you can ping us at one of the little icons there if you want to have any questions. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share, I think. And if we have any questions, we could.
Yeah, everybody, please do. If you have
Here we go.
questions for Dr. Sutton, to drop those into the chat. I don't see any yet, so I can happily get it started. First of all, I mean, it's just an amazing presentation. Yeah, the photographs are incredible of that life coming up to the surface at night, but also a very sobering presentation because I had some sense of some of the declines going on out there, but you really quantify them for so many different species. Pretty, really, really dramatic and rather sad to see that reflected there.
Yeah.
I was surprised just at I guess just the diversity and volume of life, because I do think about that blue water being that intense blue color being relatively low in nutrients compared to the water close to shore, right? We can tell from kind of the color of the water, and yet there's still so much life there. And I was going to ask you what the lanternfish eat, and you said, they're eating plankton as well. So how is there more life than we think there might be when we seem to have so few nutrients out there?
Yeah, they're just really, really quite efficient um, at taking what's available out there. I think one of the secrets of the Gulf is that while it is this kind of deep blue system, we would call it oligotrophic. We can measure the color of oceans all over the world from outer space. So for example, the water off Alaska is really green. The water right off the Mississippi River is really green, whereas the middle of the Gulf can be super blue, like off Hawaii. So, um, in general, the Gulf is a warm, stable system and stable and old. So you got to remember the Gulf of Mexico is older than tuna. I mean, tuna weren't even a thing yet when the Gulf was formed. So it's been there since before dinosaurs. So it's old and stable. But so that tends just like a jungle in the tropics. Old and stable generally means lots of species have time to fill every available niche there is. But it also the Gulf gets a little squirt every once in a while of productivity from the Mississippi River, because sometimes we'll be 200 miles offshore and we'll see a little patch of green water that has anchovies in it. So I think these little spurts, in addition to that stable, is like the perfect condition. And the deep Gulf has oxygen. A lot of these deep waters are somewhat deoxygenated, whereas the deep Gulf, the waters from Antarctica, it's got a lot of oxygen. So it's really kind of a global sweet spot for diversity in that regard. Some even think it was a refugium when the big asteroid hit and wiped out dinosaurs, and about 85% of all fish families, something like the Gulf may have been a refugium for them.
So we do have a question from the chat, and that is, are you researching the benthic community, or was this research focused just more on the water column?
So this was all water column. We sampled down to 1,500 meters. Generally, the water column will be anywhere between, say, 1,800 to 3,000 meters where we're sampling. That said, we're just getting started working on the pelagic benthic interactions near the continental slope. And we're starting to work with people that put landers on the bottom and do ROV surveys so we can swap what each other knows about that. So that's a work in progress.
Yeah, I'll keep those questions coming in the chat. Dr. Sutton, one thing I did think about is, and we talked a little bit before we got going live here about, the very deep water areas that you did a lot of this work in, and then as you get closer to what we would call the shelf break, which is where, for example, the Rice's whale is really spending its time and feeding between about 100 and 400 meters in depth, where the continental shelf drops off. And I know there's a lot happening there. I think with upwelling maybe, and I know that's where a lot of the pelagic fishermen go. So, how does life change when you get to that shelf break versus the deep areas where you were doing this work?
Right. Great question. So when I showed that the echograms, the acoustic kind of fish finder data, there's usually a ribbon of high density somewhere in the water column. So we call that a deep scattering layer. So we find that that deep scattering layer eventually contacts the slope. And what we find is that some species drop out, but the species that stay there are actually in much higher abundance, kind of clouds of life near the slope. So lately, as we're looking at that, we find really high densities of certain species of mesopelagic fishes in relatively shallow water. And one of those, a little fish called a pearl side, is probably the dominant prey of Rice's whales. So Rice's whales uh, probably make much of their living on mesopelagic fish.
So we have a question from the chat. Is there any of the dispersant still present that you can find in your work, either then in the water or in the animals themselves?
In a word, yes. Yes. So there has been contaminated sediment on the slope that gets resuspended during storm events, and that tends to lift all that right back up into the water column. And we have lots of evidence that there's still particulates of Deepwater Horizon origin still out there now. So um, we're one of the things we wondered is why haven't the offshore things recovered yet after after all this time? And the two theories that I think hold the most weight. One is that the animals are now at such low densities they can't find each other to reproduce. So the Lee effect. Once you get below a certain level, you lose your capacity to respond until you kind of get lucky. And the other is that there might still be some oil out there. And as you guys know, Deep Horizon is by no means the last oil spill in the Gulf. There are several deepwater oil spills in the Gulf every year since Deepwater Horizon. So the stressors are still coming in effect. So would they use dispersant again? I don't know. We didn't know. It's the first time it had ever been done like that. And I don't. I thought they thought the greater good was to keep it all down. But now we really know that dispersant and oil together are more toxic than either one separately.
Healthy Gulf works quite a bit on oil and gas in the Gulf of
Yep,
Mexico and trying to keep it from expanding, and where it is happening, making sure it's done safely. And I think that dispersant will be used again. I mean, that seems to be
yep, I
the
think so. Yep.
kind of part of the main response plan, is that would likely be used again. So another question from the chat about just regions of the Gulf. Are there regions of the Gulf of Mexico that are understudied in terms of sampling? And what limitations are there to conducting work closer to, say, Central or South America?
Yes, yes, in a word, absolutely. So, the Mexican sector, none of our fauna, know what an international boundary is. So we believe that every lanternfish that we've ever seen or sampled may have been in Mexico 2 months ago. And getting the cross collaboration, we have some very good colleagues in Mexico at UNAM that we really want to work with but it's just incredibly hard to get international permitting and collaboration for us to go there and sample and vice versa. So I'm hoping that at some point our relationships get to the point where we can sample back and forth because it is, we now know it's one Gulf. But I do think the South is unique and different. It's deeper. So it probably has all sorts of cool mysteries over there.
So question about the kind of trend, the new trend in drilling in the Gulf now, going deeper. And the question is, are there concerns that you have with oil and gas drilling going into deeper waters in the Gulf? And are there provisions we can advocate for to protect deep and ultra deep marine life?
I saw a study that said that the risk of oil spill goes up 8%. One is say it's for every 100 meters of platform depth. So now Deepwater Horizon would be considered a very shallow, ultra deep well. I mean, their lease is now in 3,000 meters. So the odds of spills are greater the deeper you go. And it's not just the big catastrophic oil spill that we have to pay attention to. There's enough pipe in the Gulf of Mexico to circle the equator two or three times, I forget which. So that's a lot of oil going through pipes everywhere there's a junction that's fragile. So um, yeah, the improved accountability would, just proving that it is worth, it is economically prudent to prevent oil spills because we have the technology to do it and probably to do it safely. And we need oil. We're not off oil so you can't just say stop drilling oil because then what are we going to do? Stop driving cars. Um, so that's really the focus. If we show that there's a lot down there that matters, it's not disposable, and if there is a spill there, it really, really matters. So, in those regards, the safeguards and the need for companies to go out and do pre-activity assessments so we know what was the baseline so that if there's a disaster, we know what the impact was. We did not have that for Deepwater Horizon. We had no baseline out there at all. So we're inferring damage with a baseline that could have been a lot more robust.
So a compliment and question for you, or comment and compliment and question for you from the chat. First, this talk was really incredible. Your stat on there being one third of the life in the deep sea compared to pre-2010 was so humbling. What do you hope that attendees do with this information?
Well, there's a lot of talk now about opening the Eastern Gulf, and yeah, and that's we were hoping that wouldn't happen. We were hoping that would never happen. Um, Hopefully, people can take this information and say that there's if something goes wrong, it could have this massive effect that we may never recover from. Because as we're sitting here right now, we do not know that the Gulf will go back to what it was before. And there's a general consensus among fishers in the Gulf that the Gulf is different since Deepwater Horizon. So hopefully these are the things that galvanize public opinion, which at the end of the day will turn into some policy or management decisions. It is the people of Florida do not want drilling in the Eastern Gulf, something in that nature.
A question about the recent decision of the Endangered Species Committee to exempt oil and gas in the Gulf from having to protect endangered species. The question is, how will the God Squad, some people call it the God Squad's recent decision impact biodiversity in the Gulf of Mexico? And what key data or information should policy makers know to ensure the protection of natural resources, which is our economy here in Florida?
Right. One of the big things that people don't understand about biodiversity, why do we need biodiversity? There's lots of models that show that systems are healthier, that are more diverse, more resilient. But at the end of the day, change is a natural phenomenon in the ocean, and the only raw material that we have to handle change is biodiversity, what we have right now. So the loss of any of these things is really quite incalculable. So it's just a question of, are you playing the long game? Are you playing the short game? Are you being greedy, or are you looking at long-term success? So that is what we need to, that's the story we need to push, that we as the users and the you know, when you do a natural resource damage assessment, it's a legal vehicle to pay us back for the damage they did. So we're the ones that need to set the bar and say, look, we are playing the long game, and the short-term benefits are not worth it. So that's the signal that we need to prevent, in my opinion. You're asking for my opinion, so that's it.
There was a question about the Taylor oil spill, if you knew anything about that. That's one that I think
Yeah.
went on from about 2004 to, I don't know, 2020 or something like that. So I think
Yeah.
I've got that about right. But are you familiar with that or any of the impacts that that would have had?
Yeah, a little bit. So it was a little shallower than what we're talking about, but the spill went offshore. So it was right on the edge where right near the shelf break. It's still leaking oil. And the only thing that's preventing it from being a constant oil spill is this tarp arrangement that catches the oil, and then they have to drain it off once a month. So it's still it's still leaking. It's not fixed or whatever. We've contained it, but there are times where it's still oily out there. You can still see it from space. So it's yeah, it's just, it's almost inevitable statistically. If you have enough rigs out there, eventually something is going to happen. That was a natural disaster, and then the company left. So now who's responsible for an oil spill that's still happening and the company's gone? So it's kind of an odd thing, but yeah, that's a forever thing as far as we know. I don't think we have any capacity whatsoever to seal that one.
And by the way, it was a Healthy Golf colleague of Alex and me. Scott Eustace is our community science director who does offshore trips and overflights. We get volunteer pilots from South Wings that
Okay.
take
Yep.
staff out. And Scott was documenting that spill and kept hammering the Coast Guard, hammering the government on it. And eventually they did do that, as you said, some type of capping that's not 100%, but they did finally act. And I think that was mainly due to Scott's work. So he's a great colleague. So question about microplastics. Are you finding those at all in fish and shrimp, or were you even
Yeah.
sampling for those in any of this work? Or
Yeah, we did. We found microplastics in about a quarter of all mesopelagic fishes and shrimps individuals. And oddly enough, the percent contamination went up the deeper you went. You would think, it's that whole idea. Well, the deeper you go, the more pristine it is. But the nature of microplastics is that they like to glom onto particles and snow and things like that. And the deeper you go, the more you get things that winnow detritus, and that detritus is just full of microplastic. So yeah, it's there. It's in things, and the trends suggest that percentage is going to increase.
yeah, I know the studies have found I guess the three main sources are synthetic clothing, tire
Yep.
wear, right? So something people don't think about, but you have to replace your tires. Why? Well, that stuff went somewhere.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah,
and then the wearing of, paints and finishes, even like paints on roadways and then paints on ships and that sort of thing as they abrade
yeah,
and wear.
yeah.
Question about local fisheries and more in Florida. So as of today, how does the oil spill currently affect local fisheries in Florida? Are there shoreline species or more coastal species affected as significantly today as the initial spill? And is seafood safe to eat?
And so, as far as I know, the last things I heard was that, yeah, the seafood safety, because it's been tested quite a bit. We have to remember that the Gulf is oily, which is why you drill there in the first place. It's naturally oily. So there's lots of places where oil just comes out of the bottom naturally. And the problem with assigning the oil spill to the health of the Gulf now is that there are so many other stressors, and they've been keeping on going. It's very difficult. It's almost like you're picking one straw out of a haystack full of problems. So Anything that people fish for, overfishing is the problem. And there were people that thought that closing the Gulf for what, a year and a half to fishing after the oil spill did more good than the spill itself did harm. So we're overfishing the Gulf recreationally. It's not like these are large commercial boats from wherever. So we're just hammering everything senseless in the Gulf. So it's very difficult to pick out one stressor from another in such a highly stressed system. And that is not a happy thought, but I think that's probably accurate. It's also loud. Gulf of Mexico is incredibly loud, lots of noise, lots of fishing, and a number of things were in decline before the spill started. So, and supposedly now it's king mackerel. King mackerel have disappeared. Their numbers have gone way down.
Yeah, the cobia. You probably grew up fishing for cobia, or
Yeah,
as a kid.
I grew up standing on Navarre Pier with my 12-foot spinning rod, waiting for days to weeks for a cobia to swim by to throw a jig at it. Yeah.
Well, there's been a total collapse, at least along the coast here in the Panhandle. The fishing piers all have records going back some number of years of the cobia caught off the piers, and it's complete collapse in the last decade or so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a related question about fisheries to that earlier one. So I do try to work with a lot of the fishermen that do the pelagic fishing because they intersect with Rice's whales, and they're the ones that I
Mhm.
want to report the whales and be on the lookout for them. And so I talked to a fair number of them, and I haven't heard huge complaints from them that they're not catching any fish. And when you look at the results of your data, I mean, these impacts should be reverberating through the system to where the stuff they're going out for. I know you mentioned tuna a little bit, but they're going out for tuna and wahoo and
Mhm.
marlin and swordfish. And I don't hear them complaining that they're not catching anything at all. And so I
Right.
don't know what kind of catch records there are. I've not got to get into that if they're even tracking that offshore like that. But what can you say about that? Because this is all connected together and they should be feeling that.
Well, a lot of things, the things you mentioned, things like wahoo, all the tunas except for big eye, um, they are we still there? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what that was.
Yeah. Uh, most of those things feed on shallow water prey, so things like jacks, smaller tunas, sardines, and whatnot. So there is a top system that is somewhat self-contained, and they don't rely on deep pelagic prey nearly as much. So that's probably why the numbers are there. We also have a skewed idea of what things used to be like. So it used to be white marlin was what you fished for in the Gulf if you didn't get a blue because they were that common. Now white marlin are extremely rare. So I think people have forgotten what the Gulf probably used to be like when they think, well, you know, we're still catching some stuff. It used to people Navarre Pier where I used to fish, people used to catch sailfish off that pier. I it's all about the bait, you know. The
Yeah.
cigar minnows are gone, so it's all different now.
So we're gonna keep it at 1 hour, which means we've got just time for one more question that's from the chat, and that's about mercury. Is there any significant mercury bioaccumulation detected in the deep Gulf? And does depth and distance from basically from shore affect the mercury concentration?
Yeah, my understanding is the Gulf is pretty good for mercury. So it's not, we haven't done any chroming, you know, all those chrome plants on the Mississippi. We used to release a lot of mercury. I believe things have gotten a lot better for mercury. So I have not seen a mercury warning per se in the Gulf.
Yeah, I
I
think a
could be
lot of that's
wrong, but I don't remember that.
and a lot of that's been declining as coal is used less as as a fuel and combustion. That has gone down, I think, as well. So, well, do you have any? This has been incredible, Dr. Sutton. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, just great question. So it always makes me happy. Oh, there's a lot of thought going into this. So that's fantastic.
Well, you provoked a lot of that because it was such an interesting presentation. And yeah, I do want to thank everybody who tuned in. Thank you all for supporting Dr. Sutton's work, for supporting our work here with Healthy Golf, and showing that you care about the golf. And we've got a lot of challenges right now, so do encourage you to follow Healthy Golf. I'll follow up with an email with everybody that includes a link. If you're not already signed up to get occasional email updates from us, I'll share that with you, and you can do that. But yeah. Great questions, everybody. And Dr. Sutton, again, thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
work. It's just really amazing and also very sobering, but you've given us some good things to move forward with. And we're better informed now as doing that. So thanks again, everybody, and you all have a lovely evening.